Welcome back to another episode of the Book Tribe podcast, your essential guide to becoming a successful modern day author, whatever success means to you. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Sarah Elisabeth Sawyer, author, speaker, and founder of fictioncourses.com. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Erica. Halito, everyone. Sahosafoy, it's Sarah Elisabeth Sawyer, Choctaw Hoke. Hi, my name is Sarah Elisabeth Sawyer, and I am Choctaw. I'm a tribal member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and just so very grateful to be on the Book Tribe podcast today.
I'm honestly very excited to have you and to get into this conversation around kind of writing about characters, sorry, not speakers, from different backgrounds to perhaps the author, and also more specifically about Native American characters as well. But before we start, we have the quick fire bookish questions that are a tradition on this show. And these are just some silly book related questions just to get to know you a little bit more. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Right, let's get started. So the first question I have for you is, what fictional world would you most like to live in and why?
Ooh, I'm not a big fantasy and sci-fi reader. There are a couple of worlds that I wouldn't mind being in for a while, but I've got to go with a historical, maybe 1890s Southern South United States. It's a time period I write a lot in. So I would probably pick that, although I would have a hard time letting go of modern conveniences. But if I had to pick a world, it would be definitely something historical.
Yeah, I myself am a historian at heart. I did a degree in history of art, and so for me, my area was 15th century Tudor England. So for me, I think I have to agree, historical time period is definitely the one. So the second question is, do you prefer writing in silence, or do you like to do it with some background noise or music?
Not noise so much. I do like silence, but I really like listening to instrumental music. However, when I dictate, sometimes if I don't have the option of putting in my earbuds and just listening to the music where it's not interfering with my dictation, I just go with silence. But I do like instrumental music in the background.
Yeah, I have to be so careful with what music I like when I'm like working. I have to be so careful what music I listen to, because otherwise I find myself singing along, and it's not very helpful at all. So the last question of the quick fire round is: would you prefer to meet your favorite author or your favorite fictional character?
Oh, I love meeting fellow authors. I do have a tendency to want to meet my favorite fictional characters, though. I think we get to know them so well in a book, and really getting to actually meet them is super fantastic. A friend and I actually co-wrote a story where I was myself, but I went through a time portal and I got to travel back in time and meet one of her characters, my favorite character in her book series. So I'm kind of partial to that.
That sounds like so much fun. You're going to have to send me the link to that, because I that's so interesting. And yes, I think I'm on the character one as well. I have a few book boy friends that I'd like to meet. But Sarah, thank you so much for taking part in those questions. I really appreciate it. So let's get down into the work that you do. Would you mind telling us sort of a little bit about your background and what led you to starting fictioncourses.com?
It really begins with my heart as a writer. I've got 19 books out published now. Most of them were historical fiction. I started writing when I was about 5, so began very early years, and I took it serious, really got into it when I was 23, so we're talking like 15 years ago. And I began just absorbing everything I could about the writing craft and researching it and going to conferences and workshops and being just under these wonderful mentors and writing instructors, so that when I reached a point that I was beginning to master the craft, I wanted to give back. I wanted to reach back to beginner authors where I was and help them to move forward in their writing craft and to really master some of the skills and in writing. And with fictioncourses.com began with actually my first course, Fiction Writing American Indians. And I wanted an umbrella because brand, basically, because I knew I was going to create other trainings that would fit within that. So I had taught about American Indians and helping authors to know how to write about American Indians. And I just knew I needed to bring all of that knowledge together into a course. And So I taught a lot of in-person workshops and all of those things, but being able to do it virtually through a course, I have students in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK. So it's really amazing to be able to reach authors around the world and help them along, as so many helped me.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think that's kind of a running theme with a lot of the conversations we've been having, is that, you know, it's from personal experience of what worked for you that actually helps a lot of authors figure out their own path. And so when it comes to kind of writing about characters that are kind of different to the author or have different experiences and backgrounds to the author, um, why is this such an important thing for authors to be getting right?
Mm. One, I'll just preface this by saying I think it's important that we do write about backgrounds that are not our own, because if we are only writing strictly, what we are, for me, Choctaw, white, Texas, and tribal member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, if that was all I wrote and that's all my characters were, side characters, everyone in the book was that, it would not be an accurate or realistic representation of the world that we live in or the historical time period that we're writing in. So I have a lot of historical fiction authors who are contemplating leaving out American Indian characters because they're so cautious or afraid really of including them in their stories. So I do encourage people to have a diverse cast of characters. That said, it is absolutely vital to get those right. There's a lot of repercussions especially in the book world today, where people are losing their publishing contracts, their marketing is tanking, all of those things if they're not careful in doing their research. And it's really it goes back further than that, though. It's specifically talking about Native Americans. We, our history and culture has been taken so much and used and misused and abused over the centuries, a lot by writers, honestly. A lot of authors in the early days, that's where we get a lot of our stereotypes. And so we have a great responsibility as authors to get this right, to do the research and to portray characters accurately. And if I could just go off on a little side thing, Erica, right quick, in talking about terminology, if that's
Yeah,
all right. I wanted to
absolutely. Go
just
ahead.
Okay, I wanted to just say, because I'll be using the terms like American Indians, Native American, First American, and a lot of people cringe and just almost, have a panic attack when I use the term Indian because it's been used derogatorily so much, and it's just considered a racial slur almost nowadays. You will hear me use that term because within my communities, in Indian country, literally in Indian country, that term is still often used, but it is more of an insider term. So if you're going to use it, you just need to make sure that you use it appropriately and correctly. So you'll hear me use Native American a lot. That did come out of academia, and it's considered the politically accepted term or politically correct term. But a lot of American Indians shy away from that and still embrace the term American Indian. So, just a quick thing on terminology. I spent a lot of time on this in my course, but just for those listening who might be concerned about me using the term Indian, I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's that's no problem at all. And actually it's good for me to know as well, that, you know, there's multiple references that are kind of, as you say, depends on how and when you use them, that are
Mhm.
acceptable. So thank you for sharing that. Um, so let's kind of talk about what's the impact of, you know, on their book if an author gets this wrong. In, you know, exactly, I know we've kind of mentioned it already, but for perhaps authors who are in the early stages of their career and building their audience, what is the impact of this if they get it wrong from the get-go?
Mhm. It depends on which route, or part of it depends on which route they're gonna take in publishing. If you're going traditional publishing and you're going to be seeking a literary agent who will then pitch your manuscript to a publisher, in those early phases, you'll need to be aware that a lot of agents and publishers are shying away from including or accepting manuscripts with Native American characters if you're not a Native American author. which again, that doesn't ring right with me in that, I believe authors should be judged on the quality of their writing and not on their race. But that is the reality that we're in right now. So there's stories even recently of a different author who is independently published and was promoting her book and was really getting slammed on social media because she's not Native American. And honestly, I just had that misunderstanding at a summit I was on a few weeks ago, where some of the participants thought that I was didn't realize that I was Choctaw. They missed that part and thought I was a white woman on their teaching, and they thought that was inappropriate. So, we have a lot of tense, just a lot of tense situations and, consequences that, I don't think are fair, and hopefully they'll change, because if authors who aren't Native American are leaving them out of their manuscripts, we're once again being left out of history. We're being left out of the mainstream narrative. And, I think that's a shame. So you'll have a lot of mixed opinions on this with people within the Native American authors and we have a lot of wonderful Native American authors and writers, and I'm grateful they're being recognized and being published. I just don't think we need to exclude, on the other side of that. But authors just need to be aware that there is that challenge, and so if you're going the traditional route, it might be a bit more challenging in today's climate.
We previously mentioned that there's a lot of kind of anxiety, I suppose, on the behalf of the author to write about characters that perhaps are different to themselves in one way or another. But what do you think is worse? Is trying and getting it wrong worse, or not trying at all?
I love that question. I've not been asked that before. I would say trying and getting it wrong would probably be worse. If you have doubts about your research and what you've been able to uncover about the particular tribe that you're writing about, and you're uncertain if there are stereotypes in there, or you really just haven't even considered it, I would encourage you to leave the native characters out at that point. That I think it is more important that you do leave them out versus getting them wrong, because getting them wrong and having the stereotypes is contributing to the main problem in the stereotypical views that most people around the world have of American Indians. So yeah, great question. But I do encourage authors to dig in and work hard and do their research. I do recognize it's a challenge, and it's scary in a sense. And again, that's why I created my course, and I've had so many authors say that it's given them the confidence to write Native American characters where they were almost at the point of giving up because they were afraid they were going to get it wrong.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be my next question: is how do they overcome that anxiety? What's the next step? But obviously, your course and what you're doing is essentially
Right.
that next step is doing that research to feel then confident and to apply it.
Mhm. And I encourage people to reach out to the tribe that they're writing about. There's there's some issues there, in that a lot of writers do that, but they more just do it in a bit of a barge in manner. And here's my questions, answer these, tell me what this word means, how to spell this word, and did y'all use this in this time period. I encourage them to build relationships first, and show the work that they've done, and kind of have some credentials, and when they're approaching people within tribal communities for that. But there is that option, and I teach in my course, some ways that you can build those relationships, because I think that's just really important. And knowing what resources you can rely on, which ones that you can't, and being able to make your own judgments on that when you're doing your research.
Yeah, and as you say, a lot of those questions that you kind of referenced, or the ways in which authors kind of badly handle those interactions, they all seem very kind of
Mhm.
surface level and just like, oh, give me a quick answer, when actually there isn't a quick answer to this. There is a real need to get into the culture and to
Yeah.
really understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So let's talk about the mistakes that authors make. So what common mistakes do you often find authors make when it comes to writing about characters from diverse backgrounds, more specifically Native American backgrounds?
Well, beyond the stereotypes, which I did create a free short ebook that people are welcome to, authors are welcome to go download. It's at fictioncourses.com/stereotypes. And so I cover 5 stereotypes in there. I cover 12 on my course. I go a lot more in depth, but I do have 5 stereotypes and some tips for authors to be able to overcome those stereotypes. So beyond stereotypes, one of the things that mistake that I see authors making, whether they're writing contemporary or historical, is not so in historical terms, I often read these characters and all, and there's an endpoint. There's an endpoint for the tribe. Like, it doesn't really go beyond the time period that they're writing about, or it doesn't extend into the 20th century and the 21st century. So I call that the historical only view. And it's this sense that and we were, dubbed the vanishing race at the beginning of the 20th century. And there was this sense that Native Americans would not continue on. So when you're writing historical, and I think it's reflected in my books, and it's reflected, I think, in a lot of books by Native authors, is there is this sense that the people continue on. In reverse of that, for contemporary authors, the mistake I really see a lot of them making is they want to have a Native American character. So just someone who is Native American and not identifying the tribe and the past and the history and culture that they came from, because they don't want to be specific. And I understand that. And we see this a lot in sci-fi as well with the futuristic stories, is they don't want to identify a specific tribe in that attempt to skirt around the some of the issues of appropriation and the different concerns that they may have. So they just want to have a Native American character. So I just really believe it's important for the authors to identify one tribe and go back into that history. So reverse of the historical thinking of the future. So contemporary authors need to look to the past, because Native history and culture, Native American history and culture and people are timeless, and there's not a separation with them. So really identify that tribe and then put it on a timeless timeline, if you will.
I find that really interesting, particularly. I think both are really valid, and I particularly find the token Native American characters
Mm.
isn't the direction to go.
Yeah.
There needs to be more there, and actually, I think from a reader's perspective, it's that character development of a character is really important anyway. It gives them much
Mhm.
more personality, and yeah. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
so when it comes to kind of the process, the build up to then writing the character, um, what do you think that I know that I've previously spoken about sensitivity reading, but is sensitivity reading and having a sensitivity reader necessary, or are there other routes that authors can go through to get
Yeah.
to a well-rounded, well-informed portrayal of a Native American character?
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate, this question, because I have a lot of authors who approach me about being a sensitivity reader, and I let them know that I'm not a sensitivity reader. That's not something I do even as a paid avenue. One, because yes, I am a Native American, American Indian, but I'm specifically Choctaw. I'm a tribal member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, so it wouldn't even be appropriate for me to, or beneficial for me to read of someone who's writing about the Lakota people, for example. I'm not as familiar with their history and culture as I am with my own. So, but even if you have someone of the specific tribe that you're writing about, as a sensitivity reader, my caution to authors on that is, if you do hire a sensitivity reader, you run into the potential problem, or really just the issue of, you have one person speaking for an entire history, an entire culture. So that one person is representing, all of these decades and thousands of people's lives and their perspectives. So there's, whenever you talk to, say, Cherokees, you talk to 3 Cherokees, you're going to get multiple opinions and multiple viewpoints. So if you're just hiring one sensitivity reader, you're not getting, to me, the breadth of representation that you need to inform your manuscript, and even if you hire a couple of sensitivity readers. The kind of the sticky point with this, is a lot of agents and publishers are requiring sensitivity readers. So again, it goes back to the publishing route that you're going to take. And I'm indie published, except for my newest nonfiction book, which was through Chickasaw Press. But other than that, I did choose to do independent publishing, so I wouldn't have constraints like that on me. But I understand a lot of authors want to go that route, and a sensitivity reader is really going high on the list of requirements to get your manuscript through the gatekeepers. There is one way potential that you can get around that. And that's if you have cultural experts who are willing to read your manuscript, or at least a portion of it, and give you feedback. So, say someone within a cultural department or language department of the tribe that you're working with, if they're willing to give you that feedback, and if they like your work, which again goes back to that relationship and you doing your work and doing it well as an author. But if you can have their endorsement or their write up saying that they've reviewed it and they, agree with your representation of their people, I think that would go really strongly toward when you're pitching to a literary agent and a publisher. So that's kind of my view on sensitivity readers. I don't really encourage authors to go that route. I've heard of authors having to scrap their entire book and years of work because this one person didn't approve of the representation. And I think that's limiting us in the wrong direction as authors.
Yeah, I think that's really valid. As you say, having one or two sensitivity readers is really narrowing your view of a culture. And I just wonder if, for authors who perhaps do want that. I know that you've mentioned, cultural experts and things reviewing and giving their feedback, but perhaps, sensitivity reading is a last piece to this puzzle, that if you do take on or use a sensitivity reader, that, it's perhaps after all of the legwork has been done and not as like a one and only resort.
Yeah, that's definitely a potential, and I know some authors who go ahead and do that, especially, like I said, they get slammed on social media or, different things, and a sensitivity reader can catch things that the cultural expert didn't do, and also just give you a different perspective, so then you can weigh those 2, opinions, if they're differing, about the history and culture from the same tribal people, and strike a balance in between, or go with one or the other. I would just, encourage authors that if it's if the sensitivity reader feedback seems unjust, to weigh that as well, if you've done your work.
Yeah, okay. No, that's great. And so if there are authors out there who are looking to write more diverse characters in general, what are kind of some universal tips that you'd have for them about writing diverse characters or about diverse characters?
Mhm. Oh, that's a great one. I would encourage you to read as many books and portrayals of that character's background or that tribe, ethnicity, race, um, to really read from that perspective. Read stories from, a Cherokee perspective, a Choctaw perspective, a Lakota perspective, even if you have to go back to actual historical documents where speeches were recorded. So just really trying to find voices in that culture that are good representations of what you're trying to learn and to get into your story. So I've written Italian characters, Russian, Jewish, Black. I've written multiple ones, and having people in your life that are of those ethnic backgrounds, or reading primary source material or books that have been written from those backgrounds and perspectives, I think is really valuable and can help us bring that authentic voice to our characters when we're switching between this whole cast of characters, and including all of these different backgrounds, to kind of put ourselves in their shoes. And to me, one of the best ways of doing that is reading from people's perspective who are of that ethnic background.
Yeah, no, and I think it's as you say, it's just about doing a bit more of that deep research, which might seem tiring to people who just want to get on and write their book, but actually,
Right.
it's incredibly important that they're doing it right.
Yeah.
And so when it comes Sorry, no, you say what you were going to say.
I was just gonna say, and I can sympathize with that because I'm on the other perspective. I'm an author. I know the grueling work, and you just wanna throw in the towel, and you're just like, "Forget it." It's not worth all of this work and this research, and that's when we have to buckle in and remember, why we're telling this story and what ultimately we want to accomplish with it. So writing is a tough business, but I often tell authors, write on, just keep writing.
Great stuff. And so, when it comes to Native American characters specifically, what are the kind of pitfalls that authors fall into when it comes to writing about those characters, and how can they work around them? Do you think?
So there's a couple of pitfalls that come to mind. The first one, of course, is stereotypes, and I feel like we talk a lot about stereotypes. I think Native Americans, we still see those stereotypes so much, even in the 21st century, even with a lot of education and interest and all. We still see that on a global scale. Even whenever I was in France researching for my novel, A Numpa Warrior, Choctaw Code Talkers of World War One, we were driving around and we were trying to find this particular overlook where the Choctaws did their work, did their code talking, and we stopped, and there was this French couple out in their yard, and so our tour guide, they came over and he started explaining to them in French, why we were there and what we were looking for, and so the wife asked something, and he kind of laughed. He's like, "No, no, telephone, telephone," and me and a fellow Choctaw artist who were there, we were like, "What did they ask?" And he said, "Well, she wanted to know if you use smoke signals. Did they use smoke signals in doing their code talking?" And he's like, "No, it was on the telephone." So we still have this strong image and these strong images of what Native Americans look like, for people around the world, and we have these, just really strong images from what we saw portrayed on westerns and cartoons and all of that. And I grew up on all of that, and I even had to guard against stereotypes. And my mom, she was kind of my early sensitivity reader. She's my early cultural reviewer of my books, and because she would catch things in those early days. So I think some of the pitfalls authors want to avoid is those stereotypes, and not assuming that they know all of the stereotypes, but really question and dissect everything that's in their story, all the perspectives, the dialogue, the imagery that they're putting forth in that. So I think that's one of the pitfalls. The other pitfall is, being really aware of the resources that you're gaining from. Know that everybody has biases. So whether it was written from a white perspective or a native perspective, everyone has their biases. So really learning to analyze the material that you are researching and that you're taking in, and avoiding the pitfall of just assuming that everything is correct that you're taking in.
Yeah, and I also think for writing about historical fiction as well, that's a really important thing to remember, is that historically, whether it's from the perspective of a man versus a woman, or there are things that kind of affect the delivery, and as you say, everything has bias in it, and so it's just kind of taking everything in and making a judgment on that. So beyond kind of the stereotypes, what are some of the key things that authors should be considering when developing a Native American character's personality, beliefs, cultural background? What would you say are some of those key pieces?
So, one, the specific tribe that you're writing about, the region that the tribe was located in, the time period that you're writing about. So, for example, the Choctaws, our homelands were Mississippi, and we were forced to sign the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek in the 1830s and removed to what's today Oklahoma, Indian Territory, but it's the state of Oklahoma now. So, being aware of what tribe you're writing about, where they were located regionally, that's going to affect your character if they're Plains Indians or Native Alaskan, Native Hawaiian, the Northeast Coast, the Northwest Coast. So all of those environmental aspects are going to influence who your character is. Their religious beliefs. One thing I really caution authors about is being aware of natives, quote, native spirituality, which has a lot of New Age beliefs and all mixed in that are portrayed as traditional quote Native American beliefs, and there's not one Native American religion or belief. It depends on the tribe, and then it can really depend on the time period that you're writing in. So contemporary, historical, 20th century, 19th century. So just being aware of the tribe, the time period, the location. Those are some key things when you're developing the background of your character, to be aware of how they would have been living, what they might have believed at that point, and the environmental influences on their life.
Yeah, so really it's about being really specific for yourself as well to help with that process. And I just wondered if perhaps there were any kind of positive representations, and this might depend on sort of the contemporary or the historical, but any positive representations that you've seen either in fiction or possibly even film, that authors can learn from.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a tough one. I struggle with finding good positive representations. I typically find my analysis are more on the here's kind of what they did wrong aspect, which not to say that there's not a lot of good representation. There is some, and then there are some that you can tell they really put in the effort to have that, and then the reviews are mixed. So one that I can think of, a recent example, is Killers of the Flower Moon. We have of course, the movie that came out. We had the book before that, and I really did like the book. In fact, I'm doing an analysis workshop on it. But I did like the book. It was written from the perspective of a non-native. He's not a Chippewa. So we have, I'm sorry, not a Chippewa, Osage. The two O's mixed up. So the author's not Osage. I was already familiar with the Osage murders. I was already familiar with that story. I'd heard storytellers portray, those actual stories from an Osage perspective. So when I read the book, I really appreciated a lot of the things that he did in it. I can't speak to the movie. I've not seen the movie. I have read a lot of reviews from the Osage perspective, and it's mixed. Some really loved it, loved the use of their language in there. They worked with a lot of Osage people. They worked with Osage actors and people in the language department, and so there was a lot of effort there put toward that. There were several, on the other perspective, who didn't care for it as much because it wasn't strictly from an Osage point of view. So their feedback on it wasn't as positive. So there's some examples like that. Again, you're going to get the mix depending on whose opinion that you're getting. But so I did appreciate theirs, and there have been some other movies that have had some good representation. Again, Native authors, a lot of them are more on the political scale now, or spectrum, but there are still some really good representations in there that are biased toward their people, but not biased in a political sense, if that makes sense. So there's one author. Okay, we'll cut that because I can't remember her name right now. But there's a lot of middle grade books and children's books that, even if that's not what you're writing, you can find some good examples in there.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing those. I think it's really important to share that there are, great books with Native American characters that people can kind of reference. And when it comes to Native American characters and writing about those characters, what resources are available to people to be able to kind of go through this process in a way that is educational but also helps them with their writing?
Love that. I encourage people to visit cultural centers. So if the tribe that you're writing about has a cultural center, and not all tribes do. I mean, there's nearly 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States. So some of them, or many of them, have not reached that level. But if you can go to the tribe's website, if they have a language department, a dictionary, resources like that are really good. The Choctaw Nation, we just built our cultural center in I believe the grand opening was 2021. So it's still a lot of new things, but there are a lot of museums, and even if they're not the tribal museum, a lot of those people within the museum have worked with the tribal people to help preserve their history and culture. So if you can connect with people like that through visiting those museums and contacting, reaching out. So I always encourage primary sources like that when you can. History, historical documents. I've done a lot of digging in archives in Washington, D.C., in Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma. So there's a lot of work and research that goes into that, but just really looking for those reliable sources and make connections with historians. Like you said, you had a degree in history, so finding people who are already passionate about this topic. And if they don't know the answer, they probably know somebody who does.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. And I'm guessing that, outside of Native American characters, that there are also opportunities and resources for people to, explore beyond just Native American, right?
Absolutely. So it's still, I think a lot of the concepts play into whatever uh ethnic, or race that you're writing about. So again, going back to, blacks, there's the Black History Museum, Jewish culture, there's the Holocaust Museum. So there's a lot of resources like that. And again, building relationships within those communities that you're writing about can be just so valuable because they have a lot of solid resources that they can recommend that's specific to their culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just kind of getting out there and moving past potentially anxieties of, oh, is this the right thing to do?
Mhm.
And just,
Yeah.
making that step and doing the research. I think that's what's really coming through from today is just, get out there and do the research. So I'm going to just change topic slightly because you have a dictation camp for authors, which is coming up in October. Can you just explain to authors listening what is that and why should they, how do they benefit from that skill?
Yeah, so let me just clarify for some authors because I've had some authors even ask, "What does it mean to dictate, your book?" So we're talking about literally speaking your words instead of typing them. So you're still writing your book. It's just instead of being at a keyboard, you're actually speaking your words. And for me, it's really neat because it goes back to like oral storytelling traditions and where we spoke stories and really from the beginning before we could write a lot of writers were storytellers. They were telling stories before they could actually write them. So this is still writing just like listening to an audiobook is still reading. So this is where you're taking your phone or your computer or an actual dictaphone recorder and you're speaking your stories, you're speaking your sentences just as if you were typing them, and it is a ginormous mental shift, and I struggled and struggled with it for years myself because I would hear other authors who were racking up 10,000 words a day, and some authors do that even just typing, but just these huge, insane word counts. And I was like, okay, I'm going to give dictation another try. And I failed. And I couldn't get past the mental block. So I finally did through the skills that I teach in the dictation boot camp for authors. And I do that twice a year, October and April. So that boot camp is 5 days. It's spread out over 5 days. We do about a 45-minute session where I'm instructing what it took for me to finally overcome the technical technology and mental blocks to incorporate dictation into my writing life. And I've now dictated 9 novellas and 2 novels, just basically pretty much just using my phone.
What an incredible skill. I think it's really fascinating because I often find that when I'm I don't know, even just working and writing something, I always have to kind of sit and read it out loud for it to actually either make sense or for me to go through and be like, no, that doesn't work. So I find that really fascinating. And so for people who are listening and they want to sign up to, or even just to learn more about the dictation camp that you're running, where do they go?
Absolutely. Fictioncourses.com. You can access all of my teachings that I have, specifically fictioncourses.com/dictation bootcamp.
Amazing stuff. Well, thank you for sharing that. And just finally, before we finish, if you had one piece of advice that you'd like authors to take away from today's session, what would that be?
Invest in the training that you need to gain confidence. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an instructor, I teach courses and all. Whatever instructor, whatever mentor, whatever workshops or conferences you need to go to, to hear other people's stories, to learn how to master the craft, do those things, because that is what will enable you to become a confident author.
Okay, so you have the fiction course or dictation courses for authors. Is there anything else that you'd like to point our listeners to that you're currently working on?
I do occasionally run what I call native reads analysis workshop, and that's just a one day workshop or a 2 hour workshop where I go into a book and really break it down of what I felt the author did well, what might could have been improved on, and those are typically books that I do recommend, and I do appreciate the perspective that they included with Native American characters. So those are a good opportunity to jump in on a workshop to gain that value and just really hear me analyze a story in a way that's helpful to them. Otherwise, I have my semi regular email list for authors called the Confident Author. They're welcome authors. You're welcome to go join that on fictioncourses.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And obviously, any links will be provided in the podcast description and also on our webpage. But Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we've had a few connection issues, but it's been wonderful to talk to you and actually to learn a little
Yeah.
bit more about how authors can write more authentically and respectfully about Native American characters.
Yeah, Erica, I appreciate you bringing this topic to the forefront on the Book Tribe podcast. I'm going to tell you, Yakoki, thank you for having me on here. And we don't have a word for goodbye in Choctaw. We say Chapisalachiki. I will see you again soon.